The Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that ended World War I, specifically with Germany. The only problem with the treaty was that
not all of the Central Powers were included in the treaty. This was just the way the Allies dealt with Germany and Germany alone. There were other treaties that were between the Allies and the other defeated powers, like Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. They were dealt with separately.
The Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919 by Germany and the Allied powers at Versailles Palace in Paris. They found it to be the most suitable place for the occasion due to the fact that many people were involved in the situation. Hundreds of people were present during the conference. Woodrow Wilson, David Lloyd George, Georges Clemenceau, and Vittorio Orlando were known as the Big Four.
They were the leaders of the major Allied countries: Britain, France, Italy, and Russia. They also decided the fate of the Central Powers: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire.
The treaty was signed to bring about a peace and a formal end to the war between the Allies and the Central Powers. It was constructed by the Allies. The Germans were not allowed to attend the conferences. They were simply dictated the terms of the peace and told to sign it. It was presented to Germany on May 7, 1919, and Germany had 3 weeks to accept the terms of the treaty.
At the same time, the Allies, particularly the British Navy, kept a blockade of German ports so that there was pressure on the Germans to sign the treaty.
During World War I, there was much devastation done to Germany and other countries. The treaty included harsh punishments on Germany, one of the defeated countries. Article 231, the Guilt Clause, states that Germany has to accept full responsibility for starting the war. They had to make mass reparation payments.
Even though they found it to be harsh and they didn't like many of the provisions of the treaty, ultimately they had civilians starving, and so finally the Germans did sign the treaty.
Germany accepted responsibility for being the aggressor during the war. They had to pay back France and Britain. Using the clause, the Allies created imposed reparations for the war damage. They established that the roundabouts would be $33 billion. They limited the German army to 100,000, and the Navy's vessels could only weigh under 100,000 tons. They also were forced to give land to Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. The treaty made Germany return the Alsace-Lorraine to France. It also granted Poland a strip of land in the middle of Germany. The strip of land was known as the Polish Corridor. It stretched 20 to 70 miles. It gave the newly reconstructed state of Poland access to the Baltic Sea after World War I.
In the eastern part of Germany, they lost territory to a newly created kingdom of Poland. They also found that as that kingdom of Poland was created, it truncated, it divided up German territory so that there was what was called the Polish Corridor, that on one side was German territory, on the other side was German territory, and then you have Polish land going right up to the Baltic.
Germany's size was reduced by 12.5%, resulting in a decrease in its population of 6,500,000. When people took possession of German land, the people did not move. The Germans argued that the treaty was unfair. They believed that the punishments were too harsh and too one-sided.
Germany would have to pay reparations. Those reparations were set very high, and it's going to be a real problem for Germany to try to repay. It's going to hamper their economic growth, and it's going to mean that ultimately destroys the German economy and the German currency.
Germany was forced to agree to the treaty, or the Allies threatened to enforce the treaty by invading Germany. Germany and all the major allies except China and the United States agreed to the treaty. Citizens of the U.S. didn't approve of President Wilson's agreement to let Germany be treated the way it was. They debated that Germany should be punished even more for causing so much devastation around the world. There were 2 big reasons why the United States rejected the Treaty of Versailles.
One was political, that Woodrow Wilson, as a Democrat who was shaping the Treaty of Versailles and the other peace talks in Paris, his very famous 14 points that he brings to the table at the end of the war, in his entourage, he did not include any Republicans. And since the Republicans controlled the Senate, when the treaty finally came back to be ratified by the U.S., a lot of the Republicans wouldn't ratify it.
The other big reason was because the Treaty of Versailles included a provision for an international organization called the League of Nations. It was meant to be a place where nations could work out their conflicts before it would become a war. But the Senate felt the League of Nations was too powerful.
The feeling in the Senate was that such an international body could potentially remove the right of the U.S. Congress in terms of declaring war, that the League of Nations could in some way supersede a nation's ability to determine war or peace.
The Big Four had conflict with Germany. David Lloyd George had two views. His public view was that Germany should be dealt with brutally, which he decided for political reasons. His inner view was that communism could pose a threat to the world more so than Germany's defeat. He didn't feel that Germany should have a lesser punishment, yet still he didn't want them to be persuaded by Russia to lean towards communism.
Clemenceau, on the other hand, felt that Germany should be punished to the point where they would never again be able to create another war. The citizens of France felt the same as their leader.
Woodrow Wilson was shocked by the fact that Germany could create such a disaster and cause so much destruction. America's citizens debated that their government should become more isolated and stay out of European affairs. In accordance with the public, Woodrow decided that the United States would have minimal involvement. He wanted Germany to be punished, but only to a certain extent in the hopes that Europe would reconcile.
The French were very interested in getting reparations from Germany. Much of the fighting in World War I had taken place on French soil. That's where the trench warfare was, the most devastating of the warfare in the West. And so they had towns and villages that needed to be reconstructed, and they wanted Germany to pay for that. For Wilson, he has a real concern that this is going to be an economic handicap for the new republic in Germany. And so he's reluctant to support that.
Wilson came up with a 14-point plan that he believed would bring stability to Europe. Open diplomacy. The countries cannot form secret treaties between powers. Freedom of navigation. Seas should be free no matter the circumstance. Free trade. Restrictions to trade between countries should be removed.
Multilateral disarmament. All countries should reduce their armed forces to the lowest possible levels. Colonies. Europeans should have a say in their future.
Russia. Russia should be allowed to have whatever government it wanted, and it should be accepted, supported, and welcomed. Belgium. Belgium should be evacuated and restored to the situation before the war.
France. France should have the Alsace-Lorraine and any lands taken away during the war restored. Italy. The Italian border should be readjusted according to nationality. National self-determination. The national groups in Europe should, wherever possible, be given their independence. Romania, Montenegro, and Serbia. These should be evacuated and Serbia should have an outlet to the sea. Turkey. The people of Turkey should have a say in their future. Poland. Poland should become an independent state with an outlet to the sea. League of Nations. An assembly of all nations should be formed to protect world peace in the future. Not everyone thought as highly about Wilson's 14-point plan. France, Britain, and Italy were against it. Italy had been promised territory around the Adriatic, areas that Italians had wanted in terms of expansion if they fought on the Allies' side. But when the war ended, one of Wilson's 14 points was that of national self-determination. One ethnic shouldn't rule over another ethnic group. And therefore, since that territory didn't have a large Italian population, Italy could not gain that territory. The French wanted close alliances with the British and the Americans, but since Wilson wanted his 14 points, his open negotiations, and no secret treaties, the British and the French were willing to engage in that kind of diplomacy. Another reason why the French didn't like Wilson's 14-point plan was because
the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh to ensure a peace, but not harsh enough to really crush Germany. You know, that it hit that kind of the middle of the road where nobody's happy.